Hello and welcome. My name is Lindsay Compton and I'm the Programs Manager at the Society of Illustrators. Tonight's event, Other Futures, the Graphic Novels of Megascope, is being presented as part of Carnegie Hall's 2022 Citywide Afrofuturism Festival. We have an amazing panel of authors and illustrators here to discuss ABRAMS Megascope new book, The Eightfold Path and HARDEARS. During the conversation, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to leave a little bit of time at the end to answer a few. And we're also recording the talk, so you can go back and rewatch it or share it from our YouTube channel. I'm really happy to introduce tonight's moderator, John Jennings. John is a professor of media and cultural studies at University of California at Riverside. He is an award-winning New York Times bestselling author, illustrator, and scholar who studies graphic novels, Black speculative fiction, and race. He is also the director of ABRAMS Comic Arts imprint Megascope. Thank you, John, for being here. If you'd like to get started.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay, so much for having us, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm so excited to talk about these two wonderful books with these wonderful gentlemen that I've been working with for the last, year and a half now, I guess, or more. So I also want to do a shout out to ABRAMS Comic Arts, to our editors and publishers, Andrew Smith, Charlie Coxman, and Charlotte Greenbaum for their amazing support, and to, of course, to Carnegie Hall for basically having the forethought to celebrate Afrofuturism for a full 8 weeks. Oh my goodness. So I'm just going to jump into it. And so Megascope is a new imprint from ABRAMS Comic Arts that was founded about 2 years ago after discussion with publisher Andrew Smith and Charlie Coxman over dinner at an American Library Association. And it was based off of the fact that, the Octavia Butler books that I've done with the illustrious Dr. Damian Duffy were successful for ABRAMS. And basically what I put forth to Andrew was that there were other writers of color that we could actually look at for doing adaptations and original work. And out of that particular conversation, Megascope was spawned. The name Megascope comes from the short story by W.E.B. Du Bois, The Princess Steel, in which Du Bois posits a device that could see through time and space. And he uses this device to actually have a conversation through allegory about his feelings about the U.S. steel industry. This was written in 1909. I felt that the idea of the Megascope, looking at things that were uncovered, and the fact that the Princess Steel was previously unseen before. It was actually a previously unpublished piece of science fiction that was written in 1909 by Du Bois. I just thought it was a perfect idea for an imprint, and ABRAMS agreed. So what I'm gonna do first is show some art, because this is a Society of Illustrators. I want to show you how beautiful these books are, and then I want to talk to first the HARDEARS crew as far as like where their idea came from for doing HARDEARS, some of the themes, and then we're going to end with the Eightfold Path creators talking about their work. Respectively, HARDEARS is written by Nigel Lynch, illustrated by Matthew Clarke, coming from an original story idea by Matthew Clarke. Is that correct? That's correct?
Yes.
And also the illustrious Charles Johnson and Stephen Barnes are the writers and collaborators on the Eightfold Path, and the Mercurial Chameleon, that is Bryan Christopher Moss on illustration with the Eightfold Path crew, and he can talk a little bit about how that particular book was illustrated. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to go through these images pretty quickly so we can actually jump into a conversation. All right, so I'm sharing my screen, and I hope everybody can see this. So this is the cover to the Eightfold Path. Again, written by Stephen Barnes and Dr. Charles Johnson. Illustrated by Bryan Christopher Moss. So when I was talking to ABRAMS about this book, and I want to put forth too, like when I was actually thinking about Megascope, this particular book was one of the first ones that I wanted to do. I talked to Stephen about it. This is something that he and Charles had wanted to do for a while, and I put forth to ABRAMS that this was, if you took something like The Illustrated Man or the Canterbury Tales and you fed it through the lens of like EC Comics, but with the epistemology of a Buddhist epistemology with a touch of Afrofuturism, this is what you would get, right? And so it was really, really based off of a lot of EC Comics, what William Gaines called the preachies. We were talking about this in another session, how very moral, Gaines was as a publisher and as a creator. So that was some of the influences. And on the artistic side, you have someone like Bryan, who's deeply, pushed by people like Alex Toth and Gustav Klimt, and other in a span of different artists. So you can see some of that in how eclectic it is, right? So this particular book is actually a collection of 8 different stories that are told through the lenses of 8 travelers in a cave, thus the Canterbury Tales reference, that are connecting directly to the themes and the practices of the Eightfold Path to enlightenment. So it's basically using these particular unsavory morality tales to a certain degree to get you to this space of enlightenment, which I thought was just like one of the most brilliant things I'd ever heard. So these are some of the illustrations that Bryan and his team created for the Eightfold Path. And so a totally different style was created for the wraparound story, which is happening in the cave. And these different tales are actually being woven together by the different travelers. So there's a lot going on here, but I think the thing that brings it home is this wonderful essay at the end of the book by Dr. Charles Johnson that actually really does a great job of summing things up, and it just makes it just a delicious feast for the eyes. And it's a very personal, beautiful narrative, and I'm very proud of the book. And these are just some samples from the different stories. Now, what's really interesting is that you can see that the hand that's here, this is Bryan's hand, but because of working with essentially a studio of people, the styles are shifting slightly according to the different types of genre. We have everything from action adventure stories to a noir sci-fi detective story with zombies to a very personal tale of a coming of age narrative that centers around meditation and martial arts. It's just it's just this really, really expansive story. And so you really never know what you're going to get. And I just think that, there's a singular vision behind the stories that are just, it's just really quite amazing to me. And I'm really thankful that I got a chance to work with you guys on this too. This is the first graphic novel that the two of them worked on together. This is, you can see some of the structural issues around it, as far as using Jack Kirby's 6-panel structure, and also things like the Nun, which is it was just using these really, really beautiful, the gutter is used so well in these pieces. I love the Nun, by the way. And this is from the Gauntlet, which again is a kind of a coming of age tale centered around martial arts and meditation. So that brings us to HARDEARS. Beyond Publishing Caribbean, it was founded by a conglomerate of Barbadian artists on the island of Barbados. I met Matthew, I think, first because of a mutual acquaintance, and then of course Black Kirby, me and my friend Stacey Robinson's outfit, we were showing, I think, at the embassy there. Is that correct? And we just started talking online, and I started seeing what Beyond Caribbean was doing, and I just thought it was just some really, really I just never seen anything like the work that they were doing. Obviously, very influenced by a lot of British comics like 2000 AD and Judge Dredd, because, well, that was the honestly, it was the comics of the colonizer. I had to say that way, but that was what was in that space, right? So, but also mixed with a heavy influence of local island culture, folk tales, belief structures, and again, using art as a type of resistance. HARDEARS is highly influenced by the by the Crop Over Festival, which happens every year on the island of Barbados. And it's also a, kind of a satirical adventure story that's set in an alternative reality where, where the island of Barbados is this mystical island, it's a mystical space. So these particular books were originally published by them, the first few chapters of it, and we decided to pick it up and actually gave him opportunity to finish this and put this beautiful book out in a really, really larger fashion. As you can see, the world building is incredible. My publisher, Charlie Goshman, said when he read it, he had just never seen anything like it before. Very inventive and extremely, and you can see the influences of different types of comics, but the layout and the dynamism on the page that Nigel and Matthew bring are just pretty incredible. So. Yeah, I just love the spreads in this book. I'm kind of envious, like, Matthew's sense of style and coloring is just incredible. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing and we are going to get into some discussions. So I want to start with the HARDEARS crew, and then we're going to segue into talking to the Eightfold Paths crew. So Matthew and Nigel, can you kind of elaborate a little bit about what you were trying to do when you founded the company, and also, how HARDEARS came to be, and what's been the response since Megascope, and also what do you think about working with Megascope, those types of things.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having us here, and shout out to everyone locked on. Beyond Publishing basically started as a collective. We were into comic books. It was a hobby at first. I actually met Nigel in the supermarket. I was selling a graphic novel, and he came up to me, and we exchanged contacts, and from there we became very close friends.
Nigel, you have some?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about also how we kind of came together as a collective. As Matthew said, we were a bunch of people who wanted to create a comic book, and there were a lot of artists, a lot of writers who came together, but everybody was trying to do their own thing. So we decided to say, well, if we come together as a group, the strength in numbers, and this would be, we can encourage one another to push the projects forward. And that year there was a convention. So coming together is very economical. It meant that we could share table space, we could present a more elaborate booth. So that first year we did pretty well. And every year since then, we always try to push towards finishing a book. So there were about 12 of us, and if we were paired up, we would try to at least produce 6 books a year. So Matthew and I did a book, Matthew did a book, and there were some other people. And as time went on, a few people fell off, and what was left was mainly the core group of Beyond. Yeah. And from doing this, we kind of, the way how HARDEARS was born was, it's a little bit of cutting your teeth on some of the other projects and learning from the mistakes, and then building on the strengths of the artist, the writer, building that team dynamic, working with someone long enough that you know what to do or how to deal with them. And what I would say from working with Matthew, HARDEARS was Matthew's brainchild. And he brought me onto the project, and I'm very glad that he did, because it challenged me to step out of my wheelhouse and expand. And what I did, I always tried to not control, but let Matthew run with his ideas, and we would kind of discuss. And throughout the years, some people think that there's a synergy, but there's also sometimes two styles kind of clash. And that is good, because you get to trash out things. Sometimes we don't always agree on certain things, or you would enter on and fight for certain things. So sometimes it would be a part in HARDEARS that would say, we got to do this because this doesn't make sense, or this plot hole or something like that. And then there's other times, there's always funny things I always tell people. I would write the script, send Matthew the script, and when they get back the pages, Matthew ran with a whole idea of creativity, and I'm like, okay, I got no problem, change up stuff and make sure. My job then is to make sure that it doesn't create plot holes, and say, well, if you do this, you have to add this and that kind of thing. But one of the main things is it's fun, and you have to love it. If you don't love it, you can't do it.
That's right. Yeah. It's definitely it's a very, very unrelenting medium. So talk a little bit about, how did you feel about, when Megascope was announced and that you approached, well, when I approached you to be on the line, and as far as like the type of thing and what has happened, since, signing and getting the first book out.
We were very excited about it. What I like about Megascope is it provided the space that these kind of stories could be told in. When I was young, I wasn't even sure if anybody would be interested in hearing about a story from the Caribbean. So when we started to work with Megascope, it provided us with an avenue, almost like it transported our story and our ideas to a new audience. And I was reading like a couple of the reviews, and people were like, they weren't even aware there was a pantheon of folk characters or deities from the Caribbean region. So I thought that was the most touching thing, that we had the opportunity to share this with a global audience.
I love it. Yeah, because the book is everywhere. So at this particular point. So Nigel, before we transition to speaking to the Eightfold Path crew, could you tell us a little bit about the plot, about some of the themes that are apparent in HARDEARS?
Okay, so in HARDEARS, there's a lot of allegories, there's a lot of underlying stories, because the book itself takes so much from our culture and our history. We kind of took things from different islands, from Trinidad, Jamaica, which is in the folklore. We did things to do with the culture, which was the sugar cane, the industry, that kind of stuff. Even down to the fact that we put things like hurricanes and personified them as things. That's something that is a serious thing in the Caribbean that we deal with every year. So by putting those kind of things in their carnivals, it kind of really gives it that Caribbean feel. In terms of plot and story, the story has many stories. So one of them is kind of to do with basically people resisting. The name HARDEARS actually kind of means resistance.
Authority.
Yeah, it means
so your parents would normally say you are HARDEARS because you're disobedient.
Yes.
But we kind of turn our trope. We kind of turn our trope on its head, as in sometimes you need to be HARDEARS to stand up to the authorities and that kind of thing. It has a little bit of a love story, and there were certain things that I was kind of instrumental in, where we wanted to do it where we didn't just want the damsel in distress, where she actively tried to kind of get herself out of power, but at the same time, the man, the main protagonist, he still was a hero. So those are certain things we were trying to do to balance stuff. And then the second part of the story, where we start to see Sam Lord come in, that was one of the characters I kind of really enjoyed writing, because I like to write a bit of comedy. So the way how he spoke, his mannerisms and the things he did, it was kind of, that was where it got to shine a bit. I think we kind of talk a little bit too about the plot and story.
Yeah, because one of the subplots, the main theme is resistance. But one of the subplots is how different groups, even though you're faced with a common foe, within a dynamic society, you can have groups who were working against each other. They may not have even realized it. For instance, there's a group in there who suffered because of the main sector, the society, destroying their habitat and using it to build their city. So there's a little bit of environmentalism in there as well. And then how do these groups come together to deal with a common foe? They have to forget about their distances. There has to be some reconciliation. So it was a reflection of the society that I grew up in and see in the post-colonial Barbados. I didn't experience colonialism, but I experienced the withdrawal symptoms of 400 years of slavery and then about 150 of colonial rule. So that is entrenched in the society. And I wanted to tell that story using our folk characters as allegories for the society that I grew up in and saw, and I critiqued it as well, things that I didn't like. When I envisioned this book, I was in a working environment that I wasn't really happy with. And I kind of poured that into the antagonist as well, who's kind of like exploiting the population in the story.
I love it, by the way. I think when I first read it, I was like, this is a brilliant book. And you know, you hit it right on the head. There's a love for the comics medium there, and there's also a really, really serious critique of colonialism and capitalism, you know, and also, you know, you said dependence on it. Before we segue, I want to actually congratulate you and you know, on the new sovereignty of Barbados as well. I would
Thank you. You recently became a republic.
Yes, you just became a republic. Congratulations! So wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, long time coming. The other thing I want to say too before we move on is that we just found out that the professor who wrote the contextualizing essay, Dr. Kathy Thomas, will be teaching HARDEARS at the University of California, Santa Barbara, in a new class she's creating about the Caribbean and pop culture. So their book is going to be required reading in Department of English in the UC system. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you. That's quite an honor.
Yeah, no, you guys are amazing and you deserve it. So talk about scholars. We have on this particular segue, we have the amazing Charles Johnson, who, you know, basically has reshaped, you know, literature, you know, I think several times, along with his compadre and one of my favorite people, Stephen Barnes, are legends, you know, as far as like literary legends. And then again, the gentleman below them, on my screen is below, Bryan Christopher Moss is a self-taught artist, you know, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, and is a stalwart supporter of like resistance in art, and also is an amazing community organizer and teacher, an art teacher. So tell us about the Eightfold Path and how this came to be, and how it's been working with Megascope, and how I'm hoping you're excited. That book's going to come out pretty soon. That book drops March 22nd. So you know, that's got to be pretty exciting. So who wants to start? You can start,
okay,
Steve.
I'll
Okay. Yeah.
I'll start if nobody else does. And that's my problem. Is I talk all day about anything. So I just want to make sure that other people have their opportunity.
That's okay. Yes.
So 10 years ago, I had this idea. I've always read widely in philosophy and science and you know, so forth, just so on. And the Buddhism's Eightfold Path struck me as a fantastic guide to behavior. And at some point, I don't know the exact point, it occurred to me that it would be interesting to create a series of short stories that each of which spoke to one of the spokes on that wheel. And it seemed to me that the best form for this would be visual, because the visual form, if I wrote them as short stories, there'd be a certain necessity with the language to want to elevate in terms of the seriousness. But if I did it as if I could be done as a graphic work, then it seemed to me that I could touch that EC Comics space and touch that thing that Shakespeare is referred to, looking at Shakespeare, as both the high and the low, to create something that works very well on one level if all you want is just the story, but there are depths you can go into and discussions that you can have going more deeply. I did not feel that I was capable of doing this on my own. I wanted, because I'm not a Buddhist scholar, nor am I a Buddhist. I've been a meditator and a martial artist and a yogi for all my life, really. But I wanted more than that if I was going to touch something this powerful. So my relationship, you know, one of the blessings of my life has been meeting extraordinary people, and one of those people was Charles Johnson. And I brought him the notion, and he was receptive. I'll pass the football to him in just a second. But then when we had an idea about it that seemed to coalesce, we would then brought it to you, John, and you saw what the potential was. So with that, you know, with that beginning framework, let me pass it to Chuck.
Thank you. Steve is the master behind the Eightfold I always like to say that Steve brought us the meat and potatoes for these stories. And by that, I mean the story idea, the characters, and the plot. So that was the meat and potatoes. And what I contributed to the meal is just basically a lifelong devotedness to philosophy and to the Buddha Dharma. I'm a practicing Buddhist. I took my vows in the Soto Zen tradition in 2007. I'm also an old cartoonist and comic book geek. I've always loved the visual arts from the time I was, a kid, and collected comics. They're downstairs in my garage, boxes. And yeah, this is a passion for me because we think in terms of pictures. This is the way I think the human mind tends to work. Now, Steve, you and I did do one of the stories in
4189.
4189 as a short story, and it was published in a horror anthology, right? And it's also in my most recent book of short stories, Nighthawks. So, you and I are going back and forth working in different mediums, right? Whether it's short story, whether it's novel, whether it's teleplay, whether it's screenplay. So any chance I have to work with this prolific gentleman is an honor and a pleasure. And also with Bryan Moss, whose artwork is superb.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
well, John brought Bryan into this situation. So Bryan, talk to us about your participation in the project.
Yeah, so I'll just keep it short because I'm assuming we'll talk about the deets of the book here in the next few questions. But John came to me, I want to say this was 2019. And then obviously he picked me because I can have a wide range of styles. And so we'll highlight that going forward. But long story short, it was almost just like, instant. I was like, yeah, this is exactly, it was almost felt as if it was made for me. So yeah, I injected a lot of inspiration, took a lot of inspiration, and then, you guys saw the work. So I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, one of the things that attracted me to the story, outside of the creators, I mean, just the stature of Charles and Stephen was just amazing. But then also the ideas, it's like, it just spoke to me, on so many levels. It spoke to me on all the levels because I knew of the references. I was a huge EC Comics fan. I'm a big fan of the Warren books like Creepy and Eerie. I'm a massive fan of, the Twilight Zone and this type of work. And I love anthologies. And I'm also an educator, so I was like, oh, this could be a really great way to talk about Buddhism in a very, very real and very interesting way.
It's good that you talk about the Twilight Zone, because I grew up on the Twilight Zone. My first television work was for the reboot of the Twilight Zone in the 1980s. And Rod Serling was, I think that he and William Gaines would have sat down and had a wonderful conversation, because he's another deeply moral man who would use popular culture to touch on very human issues, including things that were not talked about on television very much at the time. Within the limits of what CBS would allow, Rod Serling did amazing things. So I'm honored to be part of that tradition.
Right.
And I think that there are ways in which the breadth of the different, there's a war story here, there's science fiction, there's horror, there's martial arts story, there's all sorts of, there's time travel, there's all sorts of stuff in there, and the breadth of it allows a kaleidoscope.
Yes.
And Bryan's images, the way he could shift from one way of doing it to another and going between abstraction and more realistic images, I can't wait to get my hands on the physical book. I have not really read over it in the PDF form, because I want to get my hands on the physical book and have that experience of it. I suspect that when I pretend that I didn't write it, I'm going to read through this and I'm going to think, God, I want to meet these people. And I think that that's just that sense of what Stephen King calls the boys in the basement. It's not your conscious mind that does these things. It's something else, maybe the best part of you when you do it right, and you keep your eyes on wanting to be of service to your community. wanting to express that humanity. I think, you know, I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to do this. And it's just, God, you know, what can you say when you get to spend your life doing things that are of meaning to you and getting paid for it? I mean, seriously.
I love it. And the thing is, and I get to help orchestrate all this too. It's like, you know, it's just, it's been a really, really wonderful experience. It's a lot of work, y'all. Y'all watching this do not try this at home. Actually, we're all trying to get home because we're in the middle of the pandemic, but whatever. I want to talk a little bit because we are being sponsored by the Society of Illustrators. I want to talk to the artists in particular about process, about how you're making these books. So Matthew, first, can you talk a little bit about how you made HARDEARS? Like what, you know, and in addition to this, by the way, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Matthew and Nigel both have like full-time jobs, right? or
Yeah.
something. Yeah. And so these are being done after hours, right? First of all, that's part of the process. So first you, Matthew, and then I'm gonna segue to Bryan to talk about his process too. Yeah.
Well, originally, how it normally starts is I would kind of get inspiration. So the Crop Over Festival is a street carnival. And it is a blast of colors. There's a lot of movement. There's also music. And in the Caribbean, you grew up seeing a lot of bright, sometimes garish colors. You know, you step outside, the ocean is aquamarine, the sky is bright blue, the sunsets are oranges and pinks. But then man-made colors don't last in our environment. So you get a lot of pastels because everything bleaches out. That's right. Everything fades out. So I wanted to reflect that with the illustrations of the book. So you see a lot of bright, vibrant colors, but if you look at the lines, there's no truly black line work. It's kind of like fading into like browns, blues, there are pastels as well. So I wanted the color palette to reflect what I grew up and see, you know, my environment. I wanted to share that with people. The art too, there's a lot of flat areas, but then there's a little bit of 3D going on. And again, that was inspired by when I grew up, you would go into like a comic shop or a video game store, and they'll have posters by the windows, and the sun after a year would bleach these posters out to the line art.
Oh, wow.
So that's why I didn't really get into a lot of big set of tones in the actual coloring. There's a lot of flat and then there's like slight tones. So it's kind of homage to that visually.
I love it. I mean, so one of my things I loved about HARDEARS too is that it really, really dials into the surreal nature of comics as a medium. I've often found that, you know, we're talking about a medium where everything is a method for telling a story, from each panel to the colors. To me, like the color schemes are like the soundtrack to your story, right? And that's to me, it feels like I can hear, you know, what these, you know, what the comics are saying. The other thing is that the gutter, the typeface that you use, everything is an asset for telling a story. And it's just, I just never seen a medium like that before. I think that's why I just love it so much. Kind of segue, yeah, definitely. To segue into process, Bryan, tell us a little bit about, you know, how you pull this off and some of the things that you had to learn about your own process to get this done, because you actually had kind of a quick turnaround, right?
Yeah, totally. So
Yes.
it was a pretty quick turnaround. It was about 6 months, but it wasn't an effect of the publisher or anyone, Charles or Steve.
I just put not my fault
it was,
in the chat.
It's all your fault, John. That's whose fault it is. We'll always play John. No, I'm joking. So anyway, script was finalized January 27th of 2021, and then we were hitting the ground running. The book was due June 1st. So I learned pretty quickly to think smart, not hard, because I'm used to just like working all the way through the process very like aggressively. And so what I considered was kind of the idea of how music is made. So if you can see, music connects to people really quickly. It's a very fast process, you know. And so with being a big fan of hip hop, you can see just kind of like how you can sample different styles, different ideas. And I brought it together by using a lot of Columbus artists. And what we did was kind of create like a Marvel blueprint style.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of just like, I guess the best example is what we came up with yesterday, John, where it's like Kanye will make an album, but he'll have like 60 people involved, you know? And so it's one of those things where it's like all hands on deck, let's do some super creative fun stuff. And so it's almost a celebration of Steve and Charles's work. So in a big way, it's honoring that. And so to bring that all the way through, the process that I used was just sitting at a table. We worked Monday through Thursday for about 4 hours a day. And during the rest of the time, that's when I would work on it, set things up, whatever had to be done, really. But prior to that, I would have a lot of my friends do storyboards, because then I can take that and interpret it. And so you're combining two different ideas, and then it comes out to being something really interesting. The goal is always to pull back. So if you notice in the coloring throughout the book, it's very intentional. Sometimes I use duotones. Sometimes it's saturated and garish. Sometimes it's grayscale with just notes of, blues and oranges maybe. All of that is extremely intentional, and the panels are very intentional. So when you see the compositions, when you see each panel, that's like that detail. It's nothing's passive. So it's just not headshots, with words. Yeah. It's like literally considering their words and their vision to bring that to life. So we set the book up and then we drew the book in another month's June. So I'm really proud of it.
Wonderful. And it's funny that you use the hip hop reference, because when I'm thinking about what a Megascope book is, and both of these books to me are Megascope books. I mean, obviously, right? You're coming after the line, but what is it about a particular project that speaks to me? One of my idols is Karen Berger, who is the founder of Vertigo Comics, and she's a comics legend. I mean, this woman pretty much like changed an aspect of comics almost like by herself, And
yeah, I think about that, John. I remember her first ad was in Rolling Stone.
That's right. Man. Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually recently got a chance to have dinner with her and her husband. I was like just gushing. I was like, oh my God, I'm sitting across from Karen Berger. Anyway, so the other thing was that I wanted to have that kind of like very literary approach to thinking about comics and trying to do different things with the medium, and also to pick comics that I think the affordances of the medium like were really apparent in the narratives, And the other thing is I'm a huge hip hop fan, so I wanted to actually have like the mentality of a Stone's Throw Records, or like maybe or maybe something like Def Jam, where everybody has their have their own style. Nobody's whack. Everybody's coming with it different, and there's not a house style, Because I think the other thing that happens is that we have we're always fighting against the idea of a stereotypical monolith about the diaspora, about the African diaspora. There's nuances of things that are very similar between things that are coming out of the Caribbean and other places in the diaspora, but the experiences are different, and our Blackness is different, and we are, and so that's the other thing. It's like I wanted to get across, these are very different types of books, and the expressions of them have to, in order to get that across, be illustrated that way, And so there's not a house style, and so we're just trying to make the best books possible to show the diversity of not only the medium, but also the people that are creating them, And I think that when we make these books, that they're going to find their audiences. By the way, y'all, do not try to launch an imprint in the middle of a pandemic. I do not agree. Do not do it. So, you know what? I'm gonna segue into. Is it okay if I segue into questions from the audience? I see there's some stacking up. Is that okay, Lindsay?
Yeah, we can go there.
Awesome. I did see someone raise their hand, but I want to start with Simon Williams' question to everyone. I think this is primarily, geared towards the HARDEARS crew. So Nigel, the question is, what do people from your home think about your work? So people of Barbados, how has it been received? How's harder? And you can follow up, Matthew.
It's been well received. People are very impressed by the product, the story. When we show them the actual hardcover that we get from Abrams, they can't believe that we actually produced it. And as I was telling you sometime earlier this week, it's one of those books that when you go through it with someone and you tell them what it's about, or you show them the pages, it's a seller. People just kind of like are intrigued by it. So I haven't met anyone really that said, no, it's not. People are very impressed, especially because it's something they kind of see themselves in it. And there's a lot of Barbadian iconography in it. So it's been well received.
That's great. Has that been your experience too, Matthew, or you have anything to add?
I actually walk around with a copy in my vehicle or in my laptop case because I run into people and say, well, I did this comic and they don't know what to expect. So you have to like show them, well, this is what it is. And they usually go like, wow, they're impressed by the size, the colors, the quality of print. I mean, Abrams did a fantastic job on the print down to like the jacket with that was lovely.
Yeah, one of my greatest joys was sending both the creative teams the book design. Because the designers, the tagline for Abrams is the art of books, and they are not playing. Abrams was the first art book publisher in our country. It's founded in the late 40s by Harry and Abrams, and started off like making art books, like books about Cezanne and Picasso, and then segued into doing work around pop culture. Abrams Comic Arts was founded by Charlie Cochran. It's only been around for about a decade, and started doing work about books about comics, and then segued into doing graphic novels. And I think, when you hold it, just to smell the books, the ink, the quality of the paper, they're not playing. They're not playing. So there's a couple. This is for anybody who can jump in about this. Let's see here. Do you think that are they seeing how they feel about the graphic novel going to a mobile device, or should it stay in print only? That's an interesting question. Should it just be print, or do you think the future of graphic novels will be in this mobile space?
I think it could be both. I find sometimes especially where I live in the Caribbean, sometimes we can't always afford to get books sent, the shipping, the size, and different things like that. So there is a thing with mobile that makes it always accessible, and being able to have it there on your phone, that kind of thing, read it on your computer, that kind of stuff. I think there's enough space for both, and we always have these people that have a collective mentality. So there's enough for everyone. Not everyone wants to have something physical, and some people are collectors by nature.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Anybody else want to chime in about that?
I think.
Yeah. Good.
Go, Steve.
Okay. I like books, but I also have done a lot of reading on my iPad. And it's very nice. It's very convenient. And I think that, considering that I'm a dinosaur in a sense, it's very clear, it's got the little hands, can't barely scratch my ears. I think that people who grew up reading off of mobile devices and grew up with iPhones and so forth and so on, it's going to be even more natural for them. And to be able to carry the entire Library of Congress in your pocket, I mean, who can resist that notion? So the idea of being able to format these things so that they work on a number of different devices in a number of different ways. In the future, people are going to be scanning these things for 3D images, for 3D animation, and on your Oculus. Right. It's all right there. And I think that I don't want to be stuck in the past. I want to keep my mind open to the new possibilities. But really, it's, I hate to put it this way, but it's that younger generation that's going to make those decisions, not me. All I want to do is to tell stories, and for that to work with beautiful artists like Bryan and Matthew and Nigel, and let them lead the way in terms of what is going to work and what's not going to work. It's not for me to say.
That's a good segue into, I had a question about that too. So right now, this particular, this panel is in partnership with the Carnegie Hall Afrofuturism Festival, right? Of course, Afrofuturism as a term was coined in the early 90s, right? But we've been doing like speculative fiction work as a, as a cultural production method for a very long time. Like I said, the Megascope idea comes from a previously unpublished short story, which is a science fiction story. And this is something that Steve Bissett told me last night. It was written in 1909, which means that it predates the term science fiction. Now that really struck me. So I'm going to say that again. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a science fiction story before science fiction was actually a coined term, right? That's amazing to me. So what do you think, how do you feel about this groundswell of interest in Black speculative culture from the diaspora? And what do you think is going, and do you think it's here to stay? I mean, that's a lot of questions, but what do you think? Let me start with Matthew, and then we can kind of do a round robin as you see fit. What do you think, Matthew?
I think that it is because it isn't new, but it's now being told. So it's like a hidden story that's being unearthed. So I think it is a very positive development. And it is great for future generations, because when I was a kid, I didn't really have a lot of stories or works of art in the comic and pop genre featuring or by people of color. And now it's so commonplace. You turn on your TV, you see all these series, and I'm like, what a fantastic time to live.
I love it. I totally agree with you. Yes. Charles, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, my mind is still back with what you said about W.E.B. Du Bois.
I know, right?
Preceding the term science fiction. I think that was coined by Gernsback. Gernsback? Probably
Yes.
in the 1920s.
That's right. It was in the 1920s. That's right. So Lawrence Sullivan just said that Pauline Hopkins, and this is totally true, I just got chills. She wrote A One Blood in 1902, Pauline Hopkins, which is, I mean, basically about a lost civilization in Ethiopia with magic and technology. So, wow, that's right. What, man? So interesting. Yeah, that's to me, that's just very, I know Scott Cooper's like, wow. Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the things we're talking about, like these proto spaces. Yeah, I'm just as gobsmacked as you are, Charles. But when you when you came across, because your work has speculative aspects to it as well. Like Middle Passage is a very speculative space, right? What did you think about what's been happening over the last, say, decade or so, as far as like just the visibility of Black speculative work?
Well, I think it's the fulfillment of something I saw when I was much younger in the late 1960s. The orientation of Black nationalism, Black power.
That's right.
Towards focusing on people who had been written out of the curriculum during the era of segregation, people of color, in other words, minimized or written out, to bring back all of those stories, which are rich, not just American in terms of people of color, but in terms of the entire diaspora. So this has been building, I think, well, for even before the 1960s. But when I was young, in my late teens, early 20s, that's when I was beginning to participate in this. So now it's kind of flowered, and is reaching its fruition.
I totally agree. I often state to my students that every, Black political movement, that has existed in this country has always had a literary or artistic component to it, right? Whether it's the Black Power movement and the Black Arts movement. I think this particular piece has been, has been coined like the Black speculative arts movement. It's connected to, movements about, the everyday lived experience of Black people, right? I think it's just a revolution. I think it's the newest iteration of the things we've already been doing. And I'm gonna try to squeeze in it because we're pushing up against time. Laura says, and I'm gonna see if I can get Scott's in as well. Would any panelists like to speak about the role of spirituality in the creative process and in the content of these texts? Relatedly, any thoughts about how these texts connect to the spiritual political nexus? Man, that's a great question. That sounds like an eightfold path question too.
I guess I could look at that. I don't consider myself very political. I consider myself to be more philosophical. Philosophy being the question, what is true and who am I? Politics being sort of, how can we do things? How can we change things? How can we win a particular game? How do we organize? So spirituality then for me would be the question of what goes beyond the envelope of my ego. What is bigger than me? My community is bigger than me. My children and my grandchildren, what do I want to give to the world that lasts beyond my own life? Those questions, what was the shape of your face before your parents were born? Is that sort of question, asking about those things that are immutable, that are eternal. So I think to that degree, in order to create, at the very least, you have to go into the flow state, the state where the ego is not present. And this movie Flashdance, she's gone into the danger zone where the dancer becomes the dance. You dissolve the I thou experience, and in that there is an energy that comes about. And I think that is the doorway to the extra normal mind, the cities spoken about in yoga, the higher things of mind, and also to the spiritual spaces. So art demands entering into the flow state. The flow state is the door to those other things. And as long as you are committed to producing the best and truest material you can, you're on that path. And when you start asking yourself, why am I doing this? I'm a servant artist. I want to be of benefit to the world. The world has been of such benefit to me. That would be sort of my position on that. Charles, what do you think?
I'll tack something onto that. It might just be even more specific to the creative process. When you create a story, and if it's a novel in particular, or it might be a graphic novel, you have to inhabit all of your characters. You say give up the ego, all right? You have to be protagonist and antagonist. You have to enter into the mind and the spirit of the other. That is at times a humbling experience, right? Because you have to try to give every character his or her due. When we wrote these stories, we actually changed the gender of the protagonist in a number of stories, to bring a freshness, to the perspective. So that means you have to think like that protagonist from a different orientation, gender-wise or class-wise. So it's always a process of discovery, with every story being unlike every other story you've ever done. Two things happen, I think, in the creative process. One is you find yourself in a process of discovery, and it's also about problem solving. Every story presents a different set of problems.
That's correct.
That you have to be able to solve.
I totally agree with that. So really quickly, there's a couple questions about other media. So for instance, has anyone considered working in virtual reality, or are you thinking about using augmented reality for storytelling? And that's a free for all. Anyone can jump in that. Then the second question is going to be any upcoming projects that you want to talk about before we shut down.
Cool. I actually am heavily involved in VR. So I worked on promotion for Ready Player One. So I did a virtual reality interface. I've never seen the movie, so I don't know the terms of it, but the Nexus, I think, like the main hub. I also created spaces for White Castle. And what these kind of spaces are narratives through virtual structures. So I use Google Tilt. I'm working with a friend. We're trying to attach Unity to a lot of that to create physics within those systems. So, and then I have my Oculus Rift right here. So I work in VR probably about 20 hours a week, I would say. So yeah, it's a very immersive process that I use all the time, actually.
Anybody else want to speak to AR or virtual reality work that you're interested in or doing?
Probably not just yet, I don't think, but as technology goes, you kind of just go with the technology. So if it presents itself and there's a way to tell a story in that space and it makes sense, we would do something with it.
Right. Very well said. Steve,
Yeah, you know, it's just storytelling. It's another way of storytelling, you know, and the way they're retconning, that might be the right term, old video games. You know, we're playing a war game on VR now that is just so much fun because it was done two-dimensional, but they're redoing it for three-dimensional, and it works just fine. So I can't imagine that it's not just going to continue that way. It's going to become more common, that the equipment will become lighter. It'll just be a pair of sunglasses or contact lenses. You know, and that this will be a way that we tell stories. And I would love an opportunity to play like that. It sounds like it'd be so much fun.
That's wonderful. I'm actually putting Lindsay's actually posting spaces where we can actually order the books and pre-order books. I'll also just put up the fact that me and Stacey Robinson are doing a show at the UC Arts Culver Center, which is also part of the Carnegie Hall Afrofuturism Festival. I just put the link there. Would you guys want to end with any projects that you're working on right now that are coming up, including new Megascope books, anything, Steve, and things like that?
I'll just kind of say that Matthew and I and some other creators are working on some sci-fi work with Caribbean characters set in the future. Some really interesting and gritty stuff that's going to ask a lot of questions, and it kind of reflects the way how the regular world kind of treats some of the third world in terms of being forgotten and that kind of stuff. So
Diary Stray Dogs.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're working on.
Yeah, Diary Stray Dogs, the Wounded.
Yeah.
It has an Indiegogo as well.
I've been, hey, you can post an Indiegogo in there right now. I mean, the other thing is, I've seen some of this upcoming work, and y'all are amazing creators. So, you know, thank you for sharing that too. Charles, do you have any new projects or things you want to talk about right quick?
We've got a podcast. My wife and I are doing a podcast on the artistic life and how to live that artistic life with amplitude and integrity. And that's at www.lifewritingpodcast.com. In fact, John and Chuck and Brian, Brian were just on the podcast a few days ago. So it's great conversations.
It's hella fun. Also, you know, not to be too self-serving, but Tenerife and Stephen actually have and Marco Finnegan have a new book called The Keeper that's coming out very soon from Megascope as well. It's already getting some really great, strong reviews. Bryan, you have anything that's coming up soon that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm developing a graphic novel, Reader's Dream, that potentially will be pitching. So we'll see how that works out. If I could brag about it, my goal is to change the consciousness of kids and give them a playground of exploration and imagination inside a book. So that's my goal.
I totally love it. And for myself, editing a ton of books, but also working on the next Octavia Butler adaptation, Parable of the Talents, with the illustrious Dr. Damian Duffy. I'm also working on volume 2 of Box of Bones, you know, with Yizhe Jamal Everett and a host of others, including the great David Brame. Working on a book with Mallow Hopkinson and Stephen Bissett called Night Comes Walking, which is also going to be on the Megascope line, and a couple things with Marvel that I can't talk about a lot, but you know, that's pretty sweet. So anyway, finally, for social media, where can we find everybody?
Find me on the IG at Beyond Publishing Caribbean and on Facebook. And you could probably find me also on Pirate Monkeys 76 on IG.
And Next Chemist on Instagram, Beyond Publishing Caribbean on Instagram and Facebook.
Steve?
www.stephenbarneslife.com will get me.
Awesome. Charles?
My goodness, I'm really a dinosaur. I'm hard to find. But you can write to me at the University of Washington. That's where you can find me.
Wonderful. Bryan?
I'm also on Instagram as Strange Things Moss, or as Bryan Christopher Moss. So you can DM me there. My email is also strangethingsmoss@gmail.com.
Wow.
So those are my points of contact.
And you can find me at John Jennings Studio, all one word.com. And Steve, you have one more thing? Or did you have your hand? Oh, okay, you were saying. All right. thank y'all so much. I gotta go teach a class. So-
Yes, real quick. Thank you for your time this evening. It was an amazing panel. So many great questions and comments in the chat. Thank you for the attendees for being here. I just wanted to jump on real quick and say that. And like I said, it'll be available on YouTube to rewatch and share. So keep your eye out for that. Thank you guys so much. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Y'all are
Thank you.
amazing.
for having
Thank you
us.
so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye, guys.